I'm your host, Kim Todd. We're happy you could join us for our next to last show. The season really has just flown by, but you can still submit a question to our phone volunteers. Dial 402-472-1212 if you live in Lincoln. Our toll-free number is 800-676-5446. We do have one more show live on Sunday. That means you can send us your questions by email. That address is byf@unl.edu. We do need to know, of course, where you live and as much information about that question as you can think of. So do be sure also to check out our social media pages. That is Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Pinterest. Jody, you have beasties and their homes.
I do. So we've had a lot of calls about yellow jackets lately, and so I brought in some yellow jackets. These are not live samples. But we've got one side, we've got the yellow jackets, and I just put the paper wasps on the other side because they're often confusing. You know, they both sting. So the yellow jackets are more known for being the jerks because they will come around picnics, they do feed on meat, and they do like sweets. But I wanted to show what their nests look like because sometimes it's pretty confusing. So, so first with the paper wasp, you can see they form these like umbrella type nests, which have open cells, and they're usually hanging down by one little stalk from a horizontal surface, usually the peak of a house. But for yellow jackets, they nest in voids. So this could be underground in an abandoned rodent burrow. So we don't see them. We can see the hole that they're coming in and out of sometimes. That could be under a compost pile or something hidden. They also make these big aerial nests. And sometimes they will find a wall void and come in and out of a little hole in that void. But this is what they look like underneath if you actually were to dig one up out of the ground. So there are layers and layers of these cells. So, but it's like this under the ground, and then they do have an opening somewhere in the yard. This one here is one of those big balls, you know, people call them hornet nests. But the entrance is at the very bottom here, and they're usually stuck to a branch. So this is how they live, and this is why there are so many of them when they actually come out and start stinging in defense. So what people want to know is how to control them. So you want to be very careful. So number one, do this at nighttime, because at this time they're all in the nest, right? If you're going to treat and they're still foraging, you're going to come back, or they're going to come back very angry. Number two, when you're doing this at night, you want to wear protective clothes, gloves, and wear like a headlamp or use a flashlight that has a red light because they don't see red, so you're invisible to them. And then the products that you can get in the hardware store are effective if they are treated to the nest, so you can get the sprays that can be treated like 25 feet away, 30 feet away. There are foaming, there are other ones, but the synthetic pyrethroid in that is, it's good knockdown and will get that nest. You wanna make sure you spray it, walk away, and then the next day see if there's still things coming in and out of there. If it's very high up or very dangerous for you, please call a professional. Don't tell them I told you to do this.
And I can attest to the in the compost pile for the sting on the arm.
Yeah,
yeah,
so, yeah.
Way bad.
It's different venom than honeybees, but if you're allergic to wasp venom, then yeah, it's a health hazard. So.
All right, Matt, that is really disgusting.
I know.
I love
Just
it.
watching them fight over here. There's a bunch of them. So since didn't bring live yellow jackets to play with, I brought live grubs to play with. And it is a turf problem. Yellow jackets really don't unless they have the hole in the turf, I guess. But so what I have here is white grubs, and I noticed an area of brown turf. It was actually on our research farm, and it was an area that was not treated this year. So I looked at it and I was thinking it was drought. Kind of just looks like it's drying out in the area. But when you go and you grab it, it peels up just like carpet. If you've ever seen grub damage, you know what I'm talking about. Or you've seen the skunks and raccoons peel back your lawn like it is basically rolled up carpet. So this is what they're after. They're after all these nice white grubs. And this time of year, we start seeing the damage because the white grubs are pretty big and they're coming up to the top and they're actually feeding on all the roots. So that's why we can peel it up like carpet. And so they trim up all the roots, and basically this was just a brown piece of grass, peeled it up, and what you see under there is, I think I had about 6 or 7 white grubs. So that's way too many for this bent grass. And you can see that, you know, it has no roots to absorb water. We've had a couple dry days this week, and it just turns brown and starts to look like it's dying. So if you do have little brown patches in your lawn, that would be one thing to check for. If you do have white grubs, it's a little late to treat for them now. There are some curative products that you can apply that would maybe get rid of, let's say, 50 to 60% of them. It's not going to get all of them. But if you're worried about it, you're going to need to water it more, do a little bit more cultural practices, because that turf is going to be stressed going into the winter because all those roots are going to be gone. So you might even think about doing some reseeding. And for next year, if you have areas that are problem areas, make sure you get the applications out around that mid to late June, early July, and that's going to do a lot better job when these guys are tiny and not so hard to control.
All right, thanks, Matt. And they are trying to escape and go
Yes,
hide
they're
in
running all over the
Jody's
place.
nests over there. All right, Kyle, that's not so great either.
No, it doesn't move as near as well either, though. But yeah, I have fire blight on. This is an apple tree that came into the clinic a couple of days ago, and whenever we have hail, we tend to see some of these bacterial diseases that do pop back up. And fire blight is one of the big ones that affects a lot of our different malus tree species. So apples, flowering crabs, pears, things like that. We'll all get fire blight. And unfortunately, this is a bacterial pathogen, and so it's not controlled with the same fungicides that will control some of our other diseases. But some of the characteristic symptoms of this fire blight pathogen, and I hope we can kind of see it here, but we often talk about the shepherd's crook that kind of forms with some of the petioles here. And we also, the leaves and the petioles just turn this jet black color. And that is very characteristic of fire blight. The other thing is these leaves will often remain attached for at least for a little while, instead of like your typical, if the leaves were killed due to drought injury or something like that, they would probably fall. But with fire blight, they often do remain attached. And now control can be difficult because anytime we have a hailstorm, this thing can show back up because, again, it likes some wounds, and so anytime we're introducing wounds, we're now providing some infection courts. So the best thing that you can do is really do some pruning when it's going to be dry to get rid of these branches. And you want to make sure, if you are doing some pruning, that you're not pruning right beneath where that injury is, but you're going to want to go down at least 6 to 8 inches to make sure that you're removing all of that diseased material and you're not leaving some in the wood. Other options are some copper products do work fairly well to control fire blight if you get the timing correct. And the timing can be difficult. Like I said, this one shows up when we have hail, when we have strong winds, when we have rain. And so if you're able to time those weather events and get an application on right before or shortly after that hail event, then you're going to have a lot better chance. But once it's kind of looking like this, you're just going to want to cut this whole branch out.
All right, thanks, Kyle. That's beautiful. Thank you for bringing something beautiful.
I always bring the beauty.
All of this.
I always bring the beauty.
Yes, you do. All right, John, what do we have?
So unlike all the pest and pestilence over here, I brought some flowers, and these are actually from the All-America Selections trial. So as you know, the Backyard Farmer Garden is a display garden for All-America Selections, but we do the trials in Omaha for the program, and we have the flowers planted at our office. So it was very easy for me to grab these on the way here. And this is our Rudbeckia that we are trialing. Scott Evans in our office is responsible for growing these. But the interesting thing is we have one, so this is one that is not even on the market yet. We don't know what it's called. They just sent us the seeds and we planted it and grew it. And so you'll see that on the market next year. I don't know what the name of it will be. Someone knows, but it's a secret. But we get to compare that one to 2 that are already on the market. And you can see the difference between these 3. They've all been bred for different characteristics. So we don't know what that one is, but we know this one's a variety called Toto Gold. And this one is called Denver Daisy. And you can see, just the variability in those 3 different flowers, and it's all the same species. So at the end of the season here in a few weeks, we get to get out our scorecard and say, yes, we like this one better, or no, we don't. And then you'll see if it's an All-America Selection winner next year.
Excellent. And I just am a real fan of anything that is a rudbeckia.
Okay.
I just like those daisies. All right, we start with pictures, and you have some kind of fun ones, Jody, this time. The first is, she's from Lincoln, and she found this huge, she thinks it's a mantis in her backyard. What is it? Do they really get that big? And are they good guys or bad guys?
Okay, so it is a praying mantis. It's a Chinese mantid. It really does get that big. They're can be like 3 to 4 inches long. And it's debatable whether they're good or bad. So they are predators of many pests in the garden, but they can also prey on things that we love. And they are big enough to prey on things that are vertebrates like frogs and lizards and even hummingbirds. And so people that love birds are not happy with these because they're non-native and they're invasive. So they actually outcompete our native praying mantids. So that's questionable, but I don't know. I like mantids. I don't kill them, but that's a long answer to that question.
But you might want to kill this one if you don't want it to eat all your good guys.
Or put him maybe more in the brush or something.
Okay, perfect. Your second one here is, this is a Sioux City viewer. Good guy or bad guy? On everything.
On everything, yeah, and they're mating on everything. So this is a type of soldier beetle, and in the fall we've got the goldenrod soldier beetle, or it's also called the Pennsylvania leatherwing. They are going to be loving that goldenrod at this time, but they're good because they're like a pollinating beetle, but they feed on pollen and nectar. They're just everywhere. I mean, I found one in my bathroom today because it probably was on my shoulder or something. So.
Perfect, and we have them all over the backyard farmer garden.
Yeah.
All right, Matt, we have a couple of grass ID questions for you. The first one here is a Hornick, Iowa viewer. She says it is a weedy grass type, she thinks, and she says, please identify, advise on how to get rid of it, and would the product be safe to use in her lawn if this is in her lawn?
Yes, and this one looks to me to be a green foxtail. I was looking at it a little closer in the picture, and you can't see any. Yellow foxtail usually has hairs on the top of the leaves, a bunch of sparse hairs towards the bottom, and this one didn't seem like it had it. So yes, it's a summer annual, comes a little later, germinates around June, and in order to kill this one, it's already getting to be a little late because it's so mature. Products containing quinclorac will work on it when it's younger. Right now, you're better off if you don't have a lot of them, try and pull them. Otherwise, you could treat and that would try and prevent them from producing more seed. That'd be about the only thing you can do with that one.
All right, so notice this a little earlier next year maybe.
Yes.
And how about this one? This is an interesting picture because they purchased this grass and it's in this container. What is that, do you think?
It looks like a sedge. What I found closest to be, just by the picture, would be oval leaf sedge, and it basically produces that little seed head on the tip of, basically not the leaf, but it produces those seed shafts and has the seed on the end. And that's the closest thing I could get. It's not necessarily a weed. It can be kind of an ornamental. If you don't want it, you're just going to have to get rid of it. You're just wondering what it is, though, I think, right?
I think they were just wondering what that was.
So it'll just continue to grow in there.
All right, or not in that little
Or start
pot.
spreading from the seed, too.
All right, so you have some lilac issues here, Kyle.
All right.
And we've had these questions, or I'm sorry, this is the cornus instead. This is the dogwood questions. We've had a lot of these too. And this particular one, she says the damage really occurred rapidly on this one. She had a couple pictures here. There was that one, and then you have another viewer who has kind of the same thing. So you have the close-up of the leaves on that one, and then the other one, which is Nebraska City, is sort of more leafy.
Turning red, yeah.
And turning red. So a couple different things with the variegated dogwood on this one.
Yeah, really could be a few different things. Anytime that there is that entire branch that's collapsing, as we had in the first picture, I always tend to think about something a lot further down, likely some sort of canker. There are a few insects, some boring insects that can cause damage like that, but I'm not an entomologist, so I talk about diseases. But anthracnose is one that I kind of think is what might be going on here, because we can get some kind of reddish leaf spots that occur with anthracnose. And that can also cause a stem canker as well. And so it can girdle the stem and end up killing that entire branch. And so if, as far as management goes, really just sanitation is going to be your best friend for this, whether it is anthracnose, some other canker, or even if it is one of those boring insects, making sure that you're cleaning up that dead wood at the end of the season is very helpful. Otherwise, whatever that pest is, it will remain in that dead wood until next year and come out and can cause that injury again. The other thing is when it drops leaves, make sure that you are picking up those leaves too. If you're seeing a lot of those leaf spots will contain all of those fungal spores too. And if those stay on the ground, when it rains in the spring, some of those spores can splash back up and start the whole infection process over again.
All right, thank you, Kyle. You have a cantaloupe question, John, and this is Sarah's choice. And she said, plants look great, fruit tastes good, but they're cracking. And she sent a picture A and B here that are what causes the cracking.
So what happens is whenever fruit like this is in its last stages of ripening, if we get a rain event, especially if we get a good amount of rain, basically the plant takes up so much rain and the fruit takes up so much rain that the inside is growing faster than the outside. And so you get this cracking. Basically, these are cantaloupe stretch marks. Right, so we see that a lot. You know, if we get a lot of rain, you'll see tomatoes cracking, other fruits cracking.
Trees do that.
Trees cracking. It's just because the plant is taking up so much water during that last phase of ripening. And so it's nothing really to worry about. You won't be able to store those fruits long term, but cantaloupe's not a long-term storing fruit anyway. But enjoy them. I mean, it's just the outside that looks bad. Everything else is just fine.
All right, and then you had a third picture, and this is a raspberry question. This is carny, and occasionally they have a fruit that has this white stuff.
So actually what that looks like to me is more like a sunburn or a sun scald. So that part of the fruit is whatever is turned up to the sun. And so if we have, you know, a very bright, sunny afternoon, you can actually get that sunburn, and it just bleaches out all the color out of the fruit. So again, you can eat it. It'll probably be a little, you know, less flavorful than the rest. So.
All right, thank you, John. Well, you know, gardening and gardens serve a multitude of purposes. For many people, they are practical and also recreational. They can also serve a different meaning. We went out to one such garden in Humboldt, Nebraska to celebrate a very special occasion.
My name's Jan Wilhelm, and the reason this garden was started because of my husband. He went through a lot with his son, his family, but many years ago he told me to change my stones into diamonds, and so I decided I was going to do something. I watched him hurt badly from losing his son, and so I decided it's time, because I know how it leaves a big hole in everybody's heart, and it did with mine, watching him hurt so bad. So in January, a Saturday morning, I woke up and I had a person tell me, and I know it was God. He says, get up, get started with the garden today, or it's never going to happen. Spring will be here in 3 months, and to get started. So I called a friend of mine. We started the Humboldt Garden Club. I put a plan together and designed it. I took it to the city council. They approved it, and our garden club got together, and we just started working, moving rocks, bringing in rocks, cleaning down trees and brush, and we created this garden in tribute to all cancer survivors, the ones that are fighting for their lives, and to all the loved ones that we've lost from cancer. We also have a greenhouse that we started a lot of our plants this winter. The lavender ribbon has the hope. We've made the hope in bricks, and it's for all cancers. It's we're hoping for a cure on the lavenders for all cancers, and even though we have single beds here, each bed is for a certain cancer color, that's our ribbon of hope. So hopefully someday we'll have a cure.
Well, my mom actually found the garden. She and a friend went down and visited, and instantly just fell in love, and she really wanted to do something for Danielle, something to honor her. And so she talked about having a fairy made. So she had a fairy statue made in honor of Danielle.
I didn't know about it. I knew that we were going to have the ceremony and everything for me, but I didn't know about the statue or the plaque or anything that was going to be dedicated to me, so it was really cool. We walked around before we actually had the ceremony, and I saw it, but I didn't think anything of it. I just thought it was one of the other bronze statues that was out there. My grandma said she found it, and she said it was a perfect representation of me, of always being positive, and the fairy is super, like, I don't know, she looks happy, you know, the statue does, and she looks like she's having a great time, and my grandma just said it reminded her of me.
We had a great time, and it's beautiful, and Jan and her husband just make you feel comfortable, and they've done such a wonderful job. And I was looking around trying to figure each flower. I consider myself an amateur gardener, but was picking out things, and I saw, look at that hen and chicks, what's that doing? And they were different. So you get to see, and those are all volunteer gardeners down there that help with all that, and it's just neat. So I will be back.
I want them to feel the peace and the love that God's given us, and remember the good times they had with their families, and just heal from that broken heart like we had today. I think they felt a lot from this garden. People who come in here get a sense of peace, like God's right here with us, and they can feel like their family members with them. It's just very peaceful and serene.
You know, the Humboldt Garden Club and all of those members have really done an amazing job creating and maintaining that place that people from all over the state and beyond can come to find peace and even healing in some cases, and that's really a special garden. All right, Jody, cucumber problems. Again, this is Dawson County Viewer in Overton. Cucumbers are afflicted by the same problem as cucumbers have been for the last several years. Changing location doesn't help. Leaves are mostly healthy, some will die, and we've got one leaf there, and then we have a damaged cuke. So do we think these are the same thing going on, or what?
It looks like cucumber beetle damage and feeding, and I was talking to John earlier, and he said sometimes the cucumbers end up looking streaked like this, and then they end up growing that way. So it's the feeding from the beetles, and yeah, rotating the crop is one thing you can do if you've already been doing that, maybe floating row covers for next year, or if there's like a less vulnerable type of cucumber.
I don't know of any cucumber that the beetles don't eat, but that's...
And they're, I mean, there's the spotted cucumber, and they're kind of beetle, and they're everywhere. And if there's corn nearby, their larvae are like corn rootworms, so yeah.
Okay, all right. Turf concern for you, Matt. This is Concord, Nebraska. And the lawn was hydroseeded in August of 2018. New home was built, soil was brought in from the country. They did fertilize in the spring and the summer this year. They're still seeing these really large bare spots. They did water every other day, and they're wondering, should they cover with compost and reseed? Is it too late to do anything? What do we think here?
Yeah, I don't know. It almost just looks like the seed never got established, because it's only been, I mean, it'd be 1 year. That spring you should have had green cover there, and if there wasn't anything in the spring, then obviously it didn't take. So now would be a perfect time to go in there and basically lightly till it would be the easiest thing, or if you can run some sort of power rake or air fire through there and try and reseed it to the same variety you had. It looked like turf type tall fescue, but now would be perfect time, and if you have the ability to put some sort of mulch over it, it's going to make it easier to keep it wet, at least for that first 2 to 3 weeks to get all that seed to germinate, and then after that days are going to get cooler and shorter, so it'll be easier to keep that stuff alive rather than last year. I think we had a pretty hot August, September too, so if it was up, it might have germinated and then died due to lack of water.
Well, and on days like today, you can water in the morning and be dead by, including the people.
It dries out really fast.
Hot.
So it's still a good time to seed. I would go all the way into, let's say, mid to late September at the latest.
All right, thank you, Matt. This is fun, actually, for you, Kyle.
Perfect.
His header was weird object on the ground.
Yes.
And it is, do you know what this thing is? Hive-looking black object with black flat things on it. So what is that?
So I think that is a bird's nest fungus. And so there are a few different types of bird's nest fungi out there. I think this is in the group, the Nidularia group, just based on the dark color. But if you look closely, you can see that there are some cups in there as well. And unfortunately, this picture is taken a little bit late, but had they looked earlier, they would have seen some eggs inside of those cups. And so, again, we pathologists are very bad at naming things, and so it's a fungus that looks like a bird's nest, and so we named it the bird's nest fungus. But what happens is those eggs will get projected out of that cup, and they'll stick to anything. And so they can stick to cars, they can stick to your house, or hopefully they'll stick to another tree or something woody. And then when those eggs dry out, a bunch of spores are released, and then the whole cycle starts all over again. But yeah, it's not a pest. It's not damaging to any plants or animals. Just one of those beautiful things to stare at and enjoy.
All right, thanks, Kyle. This is not so beautiful, John. So your turn for something not so beautiful. This viewer says 2 of the 3 columnar maples are struggling. These were planted 5 years ago in obviously a pretty new construction location, Omaha. So what do we think here? Is A, going on, and B, what should he do about it?
So I would hedge a bet. So between 5 and 10 years is when you will start to see things that go wrong when you plant incorrectly. So I'm betting that they weren't planted well. So if the girdling roots weren't fixed, maybe they are starting to wrap around the trunk or some other damage. It also, if you look, they're columnar maples, but there's not a lot of space between those 2 sidewalks. So eventually there would be problems anyway. Unfortunately, I don't think there's anything you can do at this point. They just need to be replaced. So you're going to have to pull those out and decide whether or not you want to try to replace just those, or if you want to replace everything because you want everything to look the same. Because there was one there that looked okay, but the others are gone.
Exactly. Thank you, John. We've had another fantastic season in our garden. We got through that wet spring to be able to enjoy our produce and those annuals, of course. So here's Terry James to wrap up this season in the Backyard Farmer Garden.
This week in the Backyard Farmer Garden, we're going to talk about how the season went. We're wrapping up Backyard Farmer, so you can still come visit the garden. The garden's going to be here, but we're just going to talk about what happened this year. As you know, we had a very cool, long, wet spring. A lot of this stuff stayed in the greenhouse way too long. It took us a long time to actually get it in the garden, and stuff just really sat in the garden almost till the 4th of July when it finally started warming up here in the Lincoln and really across the state area. We've had really good work with our production garden. We've seen really good numbers of our produce getting harvested that goes out to our local food pantries here in the East Campus area, well over 1,000 pounds this year. I'm really thinking that we're going to surpass almost 2,000 pounds this year, so really excited about that. So come out and visit the Backyard Farmer Garden on September 8th when we tape our last show here in the garden itself at 1 o'clock on East Campus.
We want you all to come visit us at the garden, even after the show ends this year, and there's always plenty of great things to see for weeks to come, including, as Terry said, our final show of the season this Sunday afternoon.
It's that time.
It is that time. Are you ready, John?
Sure.
This is a viewer who wants to know whether they can still start their spinach, their lettuce, and those other sorts of leafy green things for the fall harvest.
Absolutely.
All right. How deep should wood mulch be placed around flowering bulbs?
So you don't want any more than about 1 inch.
All right. How do you tell when acorn squash are ripe? This is an Atkinson, Nebraska viewer.
So the stem should start to brown up, so you should see that.
Okay. This is I'm not sure where they're from. Should young trees be fertilized once a month?
Absolutely not. Only when needed with a soil test or you see some sort of abnormality.
All right. This is a Bennington viewer who has an English walnut that had 3 trunks that came up from the base. They're wondering whether a leader can be trained in this or what we would recommend.
That would probably be difficult. You might want to start over.
All right. A Neely viewer wants to know whether the raspberry canes should be cut all the way to the ground this fall.
Only if it's a primocane variety. If it's a regular one, you need to look and only take out the ones that have produced.
All right. That sounds like a segment.
Yeah. Next year.
Next year.
Next year.
Next year. Nice job, John. Okay, Kyle, you ready?
Born ready.
This is a Grand Island viewer who wants to know whether the apples that they have that are absolutely covered with scab and or rust should go in the compost pile.
Or you could just eat them. Scabby apples are fine. It's all superficial, so you can just wipe that off and still eat them. Otherwise, I would probably burn them.
This is a Red Cloud viewer who says their turf is filled with what looks like a fungus right now, and they want to know whether they should treat right now.
Send a sample in. Without knowing what it is, there's no way to know what to do to control it.
All right. We have viewers who found a mushroom with a red or a ruby-looking top on them and yellow underside. What might that be?
Could be a lot of things. Could be a ruby bolete. It could be an Aminachia. Again, send that in or send pictures.
Okay, we have a Cleveland Select pear in Pilger, Nebraska that is covered with rust. What to do now?
Wait until next year. When you when in the spring, then you can apply some sort of fungicide in the spring.
Okay, and that's your own fault if you made us all laugh.
Yeah, but it's true. Scabby apples do taste fine.
So eat them or burn them?
He'll share his recipe for scabby apple crisp later in the episode.
They make great pies.
We'll take your word for that. Okay, Matt, you ready?
Yes.
We have a viewer who apparently got a little enthused with grass seed. They have 40 pounds left over. How should they store that so that it is still viable next spring?
Keep it in a cool, dry place, and it'll stay a couple years.
All right. We have an Underwood, Iowa viewer who knows we've answered this question but wants to know again, when should he apply his fertilizer?
When? Like throughout the whole year? I would say mid to late spring, you can apply a little bit, and then summer, and then fall would be another time where you're going to apply probably a little bit more. So a pound in the fall, let's say half a pound mid to late spring, especially if you're baling it, and then another half a pound summer.
All right. Is it the timing right for fall weed control?
Yes, we're getting really close. Maybe couple more weeks when we start getting cooler temps, and then those weeds will absorb the herbicide better.
All right. What NPK numbers should we look for in fall fertilizer?
Depending on your soil test, you might only need nitrogen. So I would look at that first and then go from there.
All right. A question about permanently getting rid of weeds, a recipe.
Just spray everything you got. That's impossible.
Good answer. Okay, Jody.
Okay.
This is a viewer, this is fun, actually. This is a viewer who wonders, is there a bumper year for spiders, or are they just now coming out of hiding to take over the earth?
I would say the second one. No, there's a lot of grass spiders out on the shrubs, and so, I don't know, you notice them.
Okay. We have a Trainer, Iowa viewer who wants to know, why do we recommend drowning insects in soapy water?
Oh.
What does the soap do?
Okay, so insects have like a waxy cuticle, and the soap breaks down that waxy cuticle. Otherwise, if you put in water, some of them just like swim around or flutter around until they smell really bad.
Okay.
Soap, use the soap.
So if pumpkins collapsed within days of seeing masses of gray insects, what are they?
Squash bugs.
Okay, and
Yeah,
what
and
should
they've been there for a while. So you want to pick those off and squish the eggs when you see them.
Okay. What do you use to spray for spiders in a finished garage and in the basement?
Well, spiders are hard to spray for, so you may, if you're wanting to spray something, those exterior sprays or perimeter sprays that you can get at the hardware store will take care of some of the insects that get into those places.
All right, nice job. I do believe John won.
Yep, there we go.
Didn't win if the trophy doesn't make it.
I guess that's
Hand it over.
I can just pretend since I'm close to it.
Yeah,
just
here.
touch it.
Yeah, there you go.
Can I say I recommend glue boards?
Glue
for
boards.
Spiders
Glue
in those
boards.
places. Glue boards.
Absolutely. All right, John, what do we have for plants of the week?
So we have actually 2 or 3 plants of the week. So this is Seven Suns shrub. It's very interesting. It's a 15 to 20 foot tall multi-trunked tree. And the neat thing about it is that it has a very nice smell. We have one in our office courtyard that's getting ready to bloom, and when we walk into the courtyard, it just smells great. But it has very lovely bark, so sometimes it is used as a substitute for eucalyptus, since we can't grow eucalyptus here. And butterflies love it, especially monarchs and painted ladies. So we'll have lots of those at our office for you, Jody, coming up soon. And then we have hardy ageratum here, and it's this nice blue flower. And you can have it in part shade, it'll be a little shorter, or you can put it in full sun, it'll be taller, about 2 feet tall. So it's a really nice plant. And then, you know, our favorite that we've been talking about, the Malabar spinach. We have this vine here. This is not the vine that I brought like 2 months ago, and we've had like for months on the show, because it did not die. It actually rooted in the vase, and Kim removed it. We wanted to show the flowers, and so you can seed this. It's an annual, and it's used as a substitute for spinach. All these little leaves are very tasty, and very lovely plant. So those are the plants of the week.
Excellent. Thank you so much, John. All right, pictures next, Jody. This first one, I love some of the ways our people send in email questions. This creature has munched on a green cherry tomato, and it does look like it could eat a lot. This is in Papillion. What is that?
That looks like a very healthy and happy tobacco hornworm. But they feed on tomatoes. They love it. And it could get very, very big. I didn't know that was a cherry tomato.
It doesn't, it looks like a real tomato, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what do they turn into?
They turn into sphinx moths.
All right. So this is another one. This is an interesting one. Thank you to this viewer for putting in the dime for scale. This is, he says, about every other morning he sweeps off the patio table cover. These little things are dark green, 5 or 10. First thought it was mice droppings, only there's nothing under the cover on the table, and the table does sit under an overhead pergola.
Okay. So when I first looked at this frass poop, whatever, I was curious because it does look like a caterpillar poop, but there's 2 different sizes, and so that seems very abnormal. So I didn't know if there's like vegetation or some kind of vines that are up the pergola that maybe a caterpillar is eating and pooping, but it does not look like mouse droppings, and it does not look like bat droppings.
So it's one of your insects of some sort.
I think it's an insect
All
or
right.
2.
Or, yeah.
I don't know.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, Matt, you have identified this one before, but this is the season when we're getting a lot of pictures of it. And you have 2 pictures from 2 different viewers. The first here is an acreage south of Raymond. Wonders what it is, white blossoms to green berries to dark purple. And the second one is Beaver Lake. So what is the plant, and how do they get rid of it if they don't want it?
Yeah, and the plant is pretty, especially when it has all the purple little berries on there. It is pokeberry or pokeweed, and that one basically can get up to 8 feet tall if it wants to. And it is a perennial, and it has a very deep taproot. So if you do want to get rid of this plant, you're going to have to dig it out fairly deep in order to get rid of that taproot. Otherwise, it will most likely come up the next season. And then another thing to notice is that it does look almost like grapes when they're fully ripe. And eating those can actually upset your stomach. They're not super poisonous, but kids have been known to grab them thinking they're grapes and eat them. So it's not a good thing to let the kids run around and eat them. Just make sure that they know not to eat off of that branch.
All
or
right.
tree, whatever, weed.
Tree.
It looks like
that
a
tree like weed.
Yeah, tree like weed.
Yeah, exactly. All right, thank you, Matt. Okay, this is the lilac question.
Okay.
So, and we have had several people with questions about lilacs. The first couple of pictures here are a Yankton, South Dakota viewer. They say they've got some pictures here that show some healthy leaves, branches with a whitish fungus, some that have little dark scaly looking things, and finally some bare branches.
Yeah.
And some of these are all on the same plant.
So yeah, first there are a few different things going on here, and so the white growth on the top of the leaf is everyone's favorite, powdery mildew, which generally is not a major problem. As far as the other kind of brownish red blotches on there, could be a few things. To me, it does look fungal, so I think you might have septoria leaf spot. However, there is a bacterial blight as well that lilacs get that can cause similar symptoms to that. But if it is septoria, it would make sense that it's going to be on those same leaves as the powdery mildew, because both of those fungi like extended periods of leaf wetness and kind of cooler conditions. And so as far as control, I wouldn't do a whole lot right now. If you'd want, you can do some pruning, but the big thing will be sanitation, so making sure you're removing those leaves and picking them up off of the ground. And then just kind of let the lilac do its normal thing this time of year and hope that next year it doesn't come back.
Okay, and so you have actually another one, which is ivory silk lilac tree, and they're actually showing the rust-colored growth as opposed to just the powdery mildew. Is that, again, maybe the same thing? This is a Lincoln viewer.
Yeah, this one was tougher. To me, I almost wonder if it's not environmental, because there's the only parts of the leaves that are showing those symptoms are the parts that are directly facing the sun. Mm-hmm. So to me, I would kind of guess that it is a sun scald of sorts, but I'm always happy to look at a sample if you'd want to send it in.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Kyle. For you, we have a what type of squash is this? This is a Council Bluffs viewer, and when will it be ready to eat? So he didn't plant it. It's one of those compost pile gifts or a gift from somebody else. So I think we have this picture and then maybe one that's a little closer up of one of the squishes.
Yes, so this looks like a striped acorn squash. Mm-hmm. And so it could have been a volunteer from, something that you had if you had compost, or the neighbors had them in the garden and a squirrel brought the seed or whatever. So that is an acorn squash. And it could also be crossed with a few other things, because those are all in the same species as like pumpkins and all that stuff. So could be some weird crossing going on there.
And how does he know when he can eat it, if it is indeed edible?
So I would look for that stem to sort of start to dry up a little bit, mm-hmm. and it'll also come away easier from the plant. Like if you tug on it, if it's not ripe, it really won't come loose.
All right, excellent. Thank you, John. Well, most of the time we're enthusiastic about planting and growing trees around our home, but there are some management issues that certain trees can cause, and they can really become a headache if you leave them alone. We spoke to Chris Helzer and Nelson Winkle from the Nature Conservancy about what they do to control weed trees in the prairies.
Everybody likes trees, and trees are really helpful in your yard or in parks or places where we need shade or fruit or whatever. But there are trees that are better than others. There are trees that are in the wrong place. And when you have a situation where you have trees that you don't want, you have to know what to do about it. One of the places that we don't want trees around here is in our prairies. We have a lot of grassland wildlife and grassland plants that don't do well in the shade or don't do well around shelters like trees or places where predators can sit. And so we try to keep our prairies as open as we possibly can. And sometimes that means that we have to kill trees when they're just getting started. And sometimes we end up in situations where we have to kill trees when they're bigger. But we really want to talk today about how to handle situations where you have small trees and places where you don't want them. We deal with both native and non-native trees that can be problems in prairies and other places. Some of the bigger problems we have are with Siberian elms or eastern red cedar. Siberian elms are non-native, cedars are native. But things like smooth sumac or roughleaf dogwood are native trees or native shrubs that can be problematic if they get too abundant, especially in prairies. There's a lot of different ways to get rid of small trees. We're going to talk about some of the different ones today. Some of those, if they're small enough, you can just pull them out of the ground by the roots and you're done. But if you can't get the entire root, most of these trees, especially the deciduous ones, will resprout and they'll cause you problems for a long time if you don't know what you're doing.
For different trees, it requires a different technique. For things like eastern red cedar, we can use prescribed fire to control it. For Siberian elms that are large, we can use a basal bark or cutting it, whereas small saplings that are like within 8 to 10 feet or lower that we can comfortably foliar spray, we're going to go with a foliar spraying option. So with using an herbicide product to kill a tree, you're essentially going for different routes to get that herbicide into the tree. Through a foliar application, you're applying it to the leaves and having the herbicide be absorbed through the leaves and into either the growing points or where it's translocated throughout the plant. For a cut stump situation where you're cutting off the majority of the tree and leaving the stump, there we're going to apply a chemical to that freshly cut stump base or to the outside of that stump, depending on the chemical. In basal bark, we're using an oil-based carrier to go through the bark into the fluid transfer channels of the tree. And that's going to translocate that herbicide to the growing points of that tree and ultimately cause death.
So there's a lot of options for dealing with small trees. If you can pull them out of the ground and just be done with them, that's the easiest. But a lot of times it's not that simple. So there are different herbicides you can use, different techniques you can use. Go to places like University Extension websites or other sources and really do some reading on each of these techniques, because the label instructions are going to be different for each herbicide type, and we can't cover everything here. But don't be afraid to be aggressive with small trees. Get them while they're small, because when they get bigger, they're harder to deal with.
And of course, we cannot emphasize enough to read and follow all those label instructions when using those techniques and using those chemical herbicides. We want to manage those trees, also try to do as little damage to everything else as possible, and that's best management practices, pure and simple. Okay, Jody, pictures. You have spider pictures. They're not the greatest of pictures, but you'll be able to figure it out anyway, probably. And this viewer says they found this beautiful spider in the bathroom. He thinks it's a fisher. He's never had one in the house. What is it?
Oh, so it's a fishing spider. So I think that's probably what they meant. And it is interesting that it's in the house, but I have seen a lot of them get closer to homes in the last couple months. Yeah, they're really large. They're really pretty. I'm glad they said it was beautiful. If they really said that, that's great.
And are they good guys?
Yes, they're good guys because they're going to eat insects. I like how it's in a cup and getting taken outside.
Like a spider iced latte.
It's probably fishing.
Oh, excellent. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're called fishing spiders because some of them can eat, like a lot of them are found near aquatic environments and they can eat fish, but there are also some that don't live in aquatic environments, just like moist areas, forest, woods.
Whew, they can eat fish.
Yeah,
All righty. And your second one is this is a Council Bluffs viewer who was walking by a flower pot and identified that one.
So cute. Okay, so this is a type of crab spider. I can't tell exactly which species. It could be like, I don't know, like there's one with like a white banded, but they could be all different colors, camouflage there in that pretty yellow flower. So
Isn't that
pretty neat. So they ambush. So they wait, they sit and wait. They don't have like, they don't spin a web. They just wait for like a fly to come by or a bee, and then they grab it.
Okay.
And they look like crabs, like they're like this.
Yeah, perfect.
How was it? Just like that.
Okay, Matt, this is a tricky one because it's not a great picture. 5 by 6 area of the lawn where the grass turns a light green and then the texture changes in mid to late summer, but then it's fine the next spring.
Yeah.
And then it does this over again.
Yeah, and I think we've had some pictures of this one throughout the year also, where the lawn basically becomes a giant brown patch or areas of it. And it's very wispy grass, and I'm pretty sure it's rough bluegrass. And that one does not like high heat and humidity. So every year, it basically dies out, and then when the weather changes, it gets cooler, it starts growing, and then by springtime it looks perfect, and you don't see it again till midsummer. So what you can do now is try and rake that grass out and overseed with a better variety, because it's going to do that every year. Fungicides really don't work on it, and it's a very shallow-rooted stoloniferous type, and it just kind of makes a mat on top.
All right, thank you. This comes to us from Gary Stone in Scotts Bluff, one of our extension people, and this is pictures A, B, and C here of downy mildew.
Yes, that's cucurbit downy mildew, which actually is a very major disease in the cucurbit industry. And there are monitoring pipelines all throughout for the commercial cucurbit growers across the country. But yes, downy mildew, it will affect all types of cucurbits, and unfortunately it can jump between your pumpkins, your cucumbers. It can spread between them. Doesn't always do that, but it can. And often it's going to start out as kind of angular yellow or maybe brown spots on the top of the leaf. But if you go out in the morning and flip that leaf over, underneath you'll see a whole bunch of just fuzz underneath that spot, and that's the mildew part, and that's actually the fungal spores. As far as control, again, sanitation really helps, as well as planting resistant varieties. The other thing that you can do is apply some sort of fungicide, and so something like Daconil or chlorothalonil works very well to control downy mildew. But you want to make sure that you're scouting often, and you're making that fungicide application as soon as you see those first spots show up, because once you have leaves as infected as those, it's very difficult to control.
All right, thank you, Kyle. Okay, last pictures are a Pluot, and she planted this about 12 years ago. Blooms beautifully, bears a lot of fruit. The fruit is really firm. It never really ripens to be edible. She's tried all sorts of things. The only thing that seems to like it is the raccoons. Mm-hmm. So what are we going to say about a Pluot, John?
Well, the first key is that it came from a seed. It came from a pit that came up. So a Pluot is the result of when a plum and an apricot go on a blind date. So it's a cross-species hybrid. And so the genetics are very unstable. So if you have a seed from that, you don't know what you're going to get. It could be all kinds of different traits from either one of those and whatever it crossed with to produce that seed. Mm-hmm. So you've basically got the worst of all of those different species in this one fruit. So really there's nothing you can do but, let it go or feed your raccoons.
All right, yes, and we have a nectar plum, and ours are hard and, the squirrels get them, so eat the nectarine or the plum or whatever. All righty, well, of course, we have announcements of fun things going on in the gardening world. And the first is our Grow Row produce donations. We are still taking those Tuesdays from 5 to 7 p.m. in the Backyard Farmer Garden right here on East Campus. Our Produce for the Heart donations, totals for the season so far, we're almost approaching 1,000 pounds, and Grow Row is almost 200 pounds, lots of produce going to a good cause there. We will be on location this coming Sunday. Q&A is from 1 to about 1:45, and then taping of the show is 2 to 3, and that is right here on East Campus. Open to the public. You just get to show up and give us a good time, and we'll give you one. And of course, finally, we have the 2019 Forest Festival Family Fun Night from the Nebraska Forest Service, and that is Friday, September 13th, 5 to 10 at Horning State Farm near Plattsmouth. So lots of fun stuff. And of course, then we have Digging Deeper with Backyard Farmer. You can watch us on Facebook, Sundays at 6:30 p.m. Central. You can follow us, Backyard Farmer in NET Nebraska. And we're actually going to be talking this week about the Master Gardener program with a Master Gardener and with Terry, of course. So we have one really quick question, Jody. This one's going to go to you. Bagworms regretfully did not spray this spring, and are they correct? There is nothing to do right now besides pull them off and smash them.
They are correct.
Good answer.
And that's, no crab legs or anything on that one, huh? All right.
It's not the lightning round.
You can show
I'm holding my arms down.
All right, thanks. And that is all the time we have for Backyard Farmer this week.